Hi, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to the Writer's Bookshelf. So this week we are doing yet another thriller type book. For those of you who are keeping up with the series, you'll know that this season we're trying to do a few more genre-based books while still integrating the usual structural elements, and all the stuff that you'd expect from most storytelling books. And this week we're going to actually get our information from an author we've already looked at the previous season, Jane K. Cleland, who you may remember from the video we did, I think maybe a little over a year ago. I don't remember the exact date anymore, but the book Mastering Plot Twist. Well, this was her follow-up book to the one we're actually going to do today, which is called Mastering Suspense, Structure, and Plot. And obviously this is the book, if you're going to read both, start with this one here, because this is the one that sort of builds the foundations that Plot Twist was based on. So I want to go ahead and just take a quick look at it. For those of you not familiar with this channel or familiar with this series, we do try to look at different tools, books, courses, whatever we can to help writers or storytellers in general get better at their craft. In this particular series is designed to look at books that are put out by writers for writers, usually from the Writer's Digest, but there's other publishers out there, in order to, again, help them improve their craft. Because reading a craft book is one of the best ways you're going to get better education about how to write well. Something that your college creative writing class is not going to teach you, or at least not teach you particularly well. So this is why we do this series, so that you will know what's worth reading and what you can learn from. And then I just also want to emphasize too that every book that I cover, there's going to be a lot of overlap between each book. That's good, because that means you're going to get the foundations pretty much drilled into your head, so that when you sit down and write, you're not going to have to go back and necessarily review every book you've read to remember the points. You have so much overlap that it becomes basically like muscle memory. So that's why I often recommend these books, even though a lot of them kind of say the same thing. Now with this one though, this is focused particularly on developing sort of a reader momentum through your book, which is, I think, the simplest way of calling it. Basically, you want your reader to be engaged with what you're working on. And so there's the three elements here: suspense, structure, and plot. These are three essential ingredients that a book would need in order to keep your reader going from page 1 to page 300 plus. And so it's a good idea to go ahead and learn what those skills are, so that as you put them to practice, you can start to evaluate whether or not the story you're writing is, in fact, employing all these items. So the way this particular book is set up, there's actually two parts. We'll go ahead and take a look inside. Usually with this series, I do try to look on the insides. Obviously, if you ever come across it at your local bookstore, you can just take a peek at it yourself, and so you don't really need me to show you every page, but I still like to show essentially what you're in for. So here's your table of contents, and then when you get into your actual content, you have much easier reading pages. So they're all dark to read through. But then you're going to notice that there's actually two parts here. There's part 1, thinking, and then part 2 is writing. And the way she sets this up, there's a pretty much seamless continuation between the two parts. It's not like there's a very distinct division between thinking and writing. I mean, without those part numbers, you would still assume that you're just plodding along in the instructional. But the reason why she breaks it up is because the idea of thinking, it's sort of about planning what your story is going to do, what sort of techniques you want to employ. You're going to think about your characters, think about what their situation is, but also think about the journey you're going to put them through that's going to keep your reader interested. Not to mention subplots and other things you might do in order to kind of pinch it all together, so that's not just a straightforward, generic B-plot story, or layering in different elements of story in order to keep the reader invested in your characters and the stuff they're going through. And of course, you would have your subplots all kind of come together with your main plot to have this nice little tight thread. This book is going to show you how to do all that, and there's going to be some case studies in there that give you examples of how to tie it together. They're usually going to be in these little gray boxes here. This is not actually one of them. This is more of a form you're going to look at in order to determine what your book is going to actually be about. And this is in the early chapter 2. This is, I think, chapter 1. Yeah, know your readers. Basically, in know your readers chapter, she's telling you before you write your book, have a plan of action that's going to satisfy the type of reader that you're looking to attract. Because again, not every book is going to attract every kind of reader. You want to know who your audience is, so you write for that audience. And so you this opening graph here is going to sort of help you figure out what your book should be, so that you can reach your maximum potential audience for that. But the right here you have these case studies here. This is from chapter 2, which we'll talk about in a minute. I know it's kind of hard to see with the screen. Just trust me, it's there. But the case studies it's 2 different sample stories that she goes through. I think one's a thriller, one's more of a one's a memoir. So domestic thriller is case study 1, memoir is case study 2. Throughout the book, she's going to revisit these. They're not real stories; they're just example stories. But she's going to go through and kind of show you step by step of how she might create this type of story through using this method that she talks about in the book. And so you can kind of see it in real time, in real practice, how she applies the methods that she talks about. But essentially what you want in this first section is to figure out what your book is, so that when you do start putting together in the writing section, it all starts to make sense to you. And of course the writing section is all about refining the work you're doing to make sure it's working, certain techniques that keep it interesting and all the like. So it's your traditional craft book, but what's nice about it is focused on a particular type of craft, which is, again, the craft of developing suspense in your writing, so that your reader needs to continue to find out what's coming around the corners. So with that in mind, let's take a look at some of these chapters here, just so you know what's in here. And then you can decide if this is a book that you should want. And the spoiler alert is you should, no matter what type of genre you're writing, because again, you want readers to want to read your book, right? All right, so the chapters in here, you have Know Your Readers, which you just kind of briefly skimmed at. Again, this is being able to identify what your book contains in order to know if this is going to actually apply to the readers you are trying to reach to. Then you have Structure is King, so that's chapter 2. Remember that if you've watched the series, from the beginning, you'll know that structure is pretty much the core element that keeps a story together. Regardless of what story you're working on, a story that has no structure is a story that is not a story. One has no conflict also, but the point of a structure is your reader needs to have something that they can recognize. So I always like to use the illustration of a house. If you're inviting your friend over to if your friend invites you over to their house, and you go there, and as soon as you walk into the front door, you're in the kitchen, or the bathroom, or the main bedroom, or whatever, you're going to be a little confused, because that's not typically how a house is structured, right? Like, you may have all the 4 walls, you may have the roof, hopefully. Be really bad not to have a roof if you live in a rainy place or snowy. But you at least expect to walk into a living room, or a foyer, however you pronounce it, vestibule, maybe a front porch. There are certain things you expect when you first enter someone's house, that if you get something completely different, you are going to be surprised, and not in a good way. You're going to be disoriented, and you might kind of quite frankly think they're a little odd, and you may not want to hang out with them anymore, because why are you living in this weird house? The book is very similar. Like, a book without an introduction, or with an inciting incident, plot points, all that, might confuse a reader. So every good craft book is going to at least mention structure in some form, and so this one does the same, and it does it in a practical way. She gives you this particular one here. I think this is from the right chapter. Yes, Structure is King. She actually gives an overview of Robert B. Parker's Night Passage here. I don't know if you can see this. She actually lays down the summary of every chapter there, so you can see how structure is laid out in a popular best-selling book. So anyway, just so you know, it's there. It's worth paying attention to. And of course, you have your questions at the end of every chapter. And in this case, it's consider your structure. Whose story is it? What is your theme? Over what time span does the story occur? What's your narrative question? Structure options, and so on. What is keeping your story together, and what is keeping it from exploding into a blob of something mess? Then you get to chapter 3, which is, I think, probably the I would say this is the core element that makes both this book and the plotting or mastering plot twist actually shine as a unique book worth reading. It's when she goes through her plot map, or the plotting roadmap is what she actually calls it. What she's doing is she's giving you not a formula, but a format that you can use to not only create your main plot and have it mean something, but also integrate your subplots so that they all tie in to the main story. So basically it looks like this. You can see it over in the corner. I'm not going to linger on it, because again, you're going to read the book. You're going to get the book. You'll have it right there, and then of course you can create your own chart however you need to. But what you're going to find is she has a very prescriptive way of laying out the structure so that you can see how your main plot and your two subplots all kind of fit together. And of course, she's also got it set up so there's a very particular percentage of each section. So you've got basically every 40 pages you'll deal with subplot 2, every 20 subplot 1, and so it all kind of escalates in a way that makes sense. So this also gives you an opportunity to decide, like, what the importance level is of each subplot, like what is it that they're going to cover. So in the example of the domestic thriller, she shows how there's certain kind of oddities in her life that ultimately, as the story progresses, they coalesce into something that informs the main plot. So it all becomes like this, surprising yet inevitable ending when it all comes together, which is something else we're going to learn later on in the story. So that's essentially chapter 3, is showing you how to integrate the roadmap into your work. And it is it's not a particularly long chapter, but it is dense with information. It's not nearly as dense as the Mastering Plot Twist book was, because that one is like every other page you got a chart that you're trying to read through. So like it's deceptively thicker than the book size will let you will lead you to believe. This is not that book. This one actually is structured in a kind of a normal, conventional way, so you will get through it a little quicker than you will the other one, even though it's a longer book technically. It's more conditioned what we're used to from readers. And then you have chapter 4, set the stage. So basically your opening subheading here, of course every book's got that, character or incident driven decision making. The most common way to create suspense is to let your reader share character's anxiety. It's absorbing to follow a character who knows something bad is going to happen, especially if the details, the where and the when and the what, aren't revealed right away. It's the anticipation that that's the killer. Maybe someone is chasing you or stalking you or threatening you. And of course, it continues on. This is where, again, you can begin to see how integrating that layer of suspense into your work is going to kind of set the reader on edge enough to where they have to keep going. And they can't really stop until it all comes together. And then chapter 5, we have layer into subplots. So this is the interesting part. Subplots are hard. Just kind of a quick diatribe here. Subplots, the thing that's difficult is a good subplot could be its own main story, but because your main story is a much more important part of what the character is going through, it usually takes a backseat, but it's not invisible. And so when you're trying to do a decent subplot, like, you don't want it to be cheesy, like you don't want it to be so outrageous or so conveniently tied in that the reader's going to throw their book across the room and hit their cat or dog, because they just can't believe like how ridiculous you resolve the plots when the plots are so far away from each other that there's no reason why they should exist in the same situation. A good subplot's going to be related to the main plot, but it's still going to be its own concern. This is often where, like in a thriller, you might see the romantic subplot appear, or maybe you have some kind of backstory getting threaded in that's coming to light, or whatever the case may be. Usually it's going to be in some way tangentially related to the main plot. If you're crafting in a way that's going to make your life easier when you get to the ending. But anyway, this chapter is going to help you see how to do that well and plan it well. Remember, you're still in the planning stage on this section, so you can get a clear picture of how it all comes together. And again, it's not easy. It requires thinking. Thinking is not easy. That's something that even those of us who've been writing for years, like, you almost have to just be removed from the writing for a season in order to think like a person. I mean, we're people. We should be able to think like people. You have to be able to get in the head of not only your character, but just get in the head of a human being. Like, what would a human being deal with in these situations? What would be the likely scenarios that would help bolster the situation, that's driving the main plot. So you almost have to kind of think in terms of spider webs, when you consider like what your subplots should be, and you don't want them to be far away or absurd. Like, you're not trying to write a blockbuster that's conceptually awesome at all three levels, because at some point you're going to lose focus, right? Like your concept is your main plot, and the other stuff kind of helps support it. But anyway, as you go on, you can see more how to handle that. Chapter 6, isolate your protagonist and everyone else. So she says in a heading, isolation is a tool of suspense, and then she kind of goes through what the process is. So this is a kind of a technique to increase anxiety in the character. One of the things, and one of the main components of the hero's journey is the team. When you have people who are like on your side, it's easier to get through things. When you're in isolation, things get muddy, and again, put yourself in the perspective of a human being. You'll find that isolation is definitely a marker of not just suspense, but fear, dread. It depends on the situation. If you're writing a romance, isolation might be the thing that keeps the protagonist from moving forward, but at the same time, that isolation would kind of force them to kind of look at reality, like, are they happy or unhappy? So there are different degrees of the ways in which isolation would work. But Cleland will spend a chapter discussing the ways isolation or putting your character in isolation improves the plot's momentum, and ultimately gets the reader invested in what your character is going through. And it's not just a matter of just make them alone. Again, it's the philosophy of why they should be alone at some point, techniques in which you can make that work to your advantage. You have one section here on metaphors that illuminate isolation. So if you're looking for something more literary, you can certainly use symbols and things in order to make that happen. So anyway, that's chapter 6, and then you have chapter 7, the devil made me do it. So again, opening chapter here, understanding human nature. This is where you deal with the gray areas of human nature. We're not all saints. She has a section here that says human nature is what people think and do. The details are what's included or left out in the description. The expertise is what people know or don't. And then of course it just continues to go on. There's some of the ways we can sort of manipulate readers' understanding of the situation, or the character's understanding of the situation. She talks about structural red herrings, the bandwagon fallacy, confounding readers with appearance miscues, and of course, obviously, you don't want to cheat. Like, you don't want to throw something so out of left field that there's nothing there to set it up. Like, this is about laying the tracks in, and she has something similar in the other book about setting up the breadcrumbs, helping a character get out of a situation, so it's not a surprise, but like more of a callback. There's those things here too, but ultimately, the section is looking for ways in which to drive the narrative through the misdirections and so forth. All right, let's see here. There's more here, but that's one of the things to remember. So that brings us to part 2, the writing section. Now, this one I'm going to glaze through a bit, because hopefully by now you're seeing the benefit of why this book is useful. But this is where, when you actually start the writing, you do want to focus on the details, make sure things are working. So this is why chapter 8 we have, it's called Add Surprise Sparingly. Hope you can see that. So if you recall from our video on mastering plots, Jane Cleland has the TRD method, I believe she's the one that does this. Hope I'm not mistaken from another writer, but the TRDs would be the twists, the reversals, and the dangers of storytelling. And so surprise would be kind of in that realm. And in this particular case, like a good surprise is going to captivate your reader, like especially like if you're at the end of like a 20-page, not a boring scene, but a scene that maybe doesn't have the momentum that you would want in a high octane thriller, for example. The surprise might be a way to kind of get them back into investing in that story. So But she says you use it sparingly because you don't want to cheapen every surprise. You know, if you think about it, like the more surprised you are, like the jump scare from a horror movie, for example, at some point you're gonna be like, that's not like, you know, it goes from to, you don't want the surprises to be so abundant that they're no longer surprising. And so she's kind of helping you see like where the surprises fit best, when to consider using them. And of course she breaks down what a good surprise looks like, how to set them up. You know, and again, I hope by now you're beginning to see the value of what some of these instructions are about. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of summarize the rest of these because I think this video is getting long enough here. Your other chapters, you got chapter 9 is getting into readers' heads. I'm just going to go to the table of contents real quick so we can kind of look at the overview. And again, you can always preview this on Amazon too. So chapter 9 is getting into your readers' heads. Chapter 10 is whisper, don't shout. So that's when you produce subtleties in your writing. Again, that's kind of tied into like the surprises and other things. It's not being so overt that your reader spots it, you know, immediately. But they are satisfied when they see it pay out there. Chapter 11, illuminate fear and dread. So that's kind of a sister to the isolation, I think. I may be making that up, but I think that's about what you want to do. But anyway, again, readers are emotional people as much as your characters are, and the way that readers stay invested in your story is to keep them emotionally invested. So when you capitalize on the emotions that force us to want to get through to a place of safety, you have to first put their psychology through a dangerous point. And so fear and dread, those are the things that keep us going. So you know, a dog goes missing. The main character puts out some, you know, signs to, you know, for neighbors to keep a lookout. And then, you know, at some point, the protagonist is walking along the street and somebody comes running up saying, hey, quick, you got to come here, quick. And the reader, you know, the protagonist is maybe hopeful, but then as the neighbor, whoever, draws them closer to where they want to go, they can begin to see this mound of fur and flesh in the street, like, you know, battered and all that, and it's got the right color, the right shape, and as a reader, we're like, oh no, please don't let it be. And of course, when you finally get there, you find it's not a dog, but like a honey badger, or it's a raccoon, or not, wouldn't never be a raccoon, but it's something that might look like or resemble the creature that we're trying to find. But you know, we're relieved that it's not that, but you know, we can't settle down until we find out for sure that, you know, it's not the right creature. You know what I'm trying to say. So, you know, it capitalizes on the worry that we want our characters to, you know, ultimately have their happy ending. That'd be kind of hard to do when we're afraid for what's coming, you know. And of course, the more we care about the characters, the more we fear what they go through. But anyway, chapter 12, reveal answers slowly. That's important too, because, you know, if you answer them quickly, you remove the surprise, right? And then the reader's got no more anxiety, no more reason to be on the hook for what you're reading. And then of course 13, writing sentences that work. So that's the practical level of writing. You know, what good is a good book if your sentences don't make any sense? And then conclusion, and then afterward and all that. So that's essentially the book in a nutshell. It's easier to read than the plot twist book, but I think they're both effective. Again, just kind of show you the other one, just to remember these are the two that she wrote. I do recommend both books, but again, you can watch my video on plot twist. I think it was I know it was the 18th episode of season 2, so what is that? No, episode 38, I think. If you go back and through my YouTube queue, you can find it, find out more about that book. You know, I can't recall how long ago that was, but the two of them together, you're gonna write better suspenseful stories, even if it's not a thriller you're writing, but like a romance or sci-fi, whatever it is you're working on. I do recommend going through it and putting it to practice. Like any book, you know, depending on how invested you are, one of the risky things about doing a series or a binge of crap book reading is at some point, yeah, you're going to have the overlap, but at some point you might start to zone out a little bit. So I would just make sure you keep yourself in check when you're reading this stuff. Do pace yourself. I know one of the things about doing this series is that I'm trying to get through them quickly, so I'm not always getting the most out of them that I would want to get. So I would encourage you guys, while you have the time, while you're not, doing your own book reviews, take the time to really pay attention to what's being said. Apply it in some way, or at least think about ways you can apply it. Because sometimes, like, spending time just letting it stew in your mind is enough to help see more clearly what your goal is. And of course, the writing itself is not going to be so easy. The writing itself will be a challenge. You're going to find a lot of your good ideas suddenly go missing once you sit down at the keyboard. It's just the nature of how writing works. But over time, you're going to find that it just gets easier. Well, no, that's not true. It gets more it doesn't get more comfortable. It actually gets more painful. Yeah, that's probably the more accurate way of saying it. But you begin to understand better what you should be doing, and that's why it becomes more difficult, because you realize that storytelling is not so simple as mashing words together and getting a character from point A to point B. Like, there's motivations and conflicts and all the things, but there's also a level of getting your reader to care. And that's a difficult thing to do without some kind of plan in mind. Again, it doesn't have to be necessarily be written down, but it should at least be in your head, like what you want to do. Because if the story doesn't work, the reader's not going to care. So that's the advantage of going through books like this, is you can begin to better see how the plotting works in your favor in ways you can think about how to structure that so that it makes sense ultimately. But anyhow, that's today's episode of The Writer's Bookshelf. Again, the book is Mastering Suspense, Structure, and Plot by Jen K. Cleland. I do highly recommend it. It came out, I think, in 2016, $18.99. I'm sure it still is. You can get it Barnes & Noble, Amazon, all the usual places. It's one of those books that occasionally pops back up in the bookstore. So you may find it, on your shelf at your local Barnes & Noble if you go look in the reference and writing section. And if it's not there, it's still easy to get. Again, I would recommend getting both books if you can. I just real quick before I wrap it up, I am finding, I just wrote down an outline. I never outline any of my videos. I always just go for it. But I'm going to be doing a state of the channel video at some point in the next couple weeks, I believe. And I spent last night outlining everything I want to talk about. And one of the things, just to kind of preview, I may be reducing the Writer's Bookshelf down to one a month for a few reasons, which I'll explain in that upcoming video. But the short of it is that I'm really lagging behind a lot of the stuff that I need to get done. So if you do find, I am going to do my best to keep it weekly for now, every first and third Friday of the month. But if you find that I miss a week, don't be surprised. There's another one coming. I have a plan for the ones I want to cover, but I may not necessarily get to them 2 a month like I've been doing. I'm certainly not going to go back to 4 a month, because that's it's unreasonable on me, but also it's not fair to you, because you don't want to be inundated. Even if you can read one book a week, it doesn't mean that you should when it comes to craft. Like, you really need to take your time. So I'm tempted to reduce it down to 1 a month, which is what we usually do for the bonus series. But I think there's a good chance I may be making that part of the regular series, just again to give myself time to kind of keep my head together, to stay ahead of the queue, but also to give you guys a chance to actually read and learn something. And if you are in fact taking these books as prescription and not as casual learning. But anyway, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I'm just saying don't be surprised if you find that I reduce this down to the first Friday of the month instead of every first and third. So I do think there's a good chance that may happen pretty soon. In fact, I do have I'm in the middle of reading the book that I want to do in the next 2 weeks. We are heading into February. You kind of know what the genre focus might be. Not to give away any spoilers or anything, but it's it could be the most popular genre that writers face. It's one I don't particularly write in, but it's not for lack of knowledge. It's but again, I don't want to give away any surprises. You'll have to come back in a couple weeks to find out what genre we're talking about and the book that we're going to look at. But, you know, again, just it may or may not be the most lucrative genre, you know, and with a particular popularity in February. It's romance. We're going to do the romance genre. I don't write romance, so this will be fun. But the book I'm reading is pretty darn good. So come back in February. We're going to do at least one romance book, maybe two. And it's kind of, you'll see. Hopefully. I'm still reading it. I hope I'm not lying to you right now. Put it that way. Just come back in a couple weeks. All right. That's it for now. Thanks for watching. We'll see you for the next video. Have a good day. Bye.